everything that looks beneficial about fasting is encompassed by exercise. And if we are simply, and when I say simply, there is quotations around that in the modern world, it is a non-trivial thing to not overeat. But if one simply does not overeat, eats more or less kind of a species appropriate diet, and you do some modicum of exercise, I believe that every bit of benefit of fasting that we could ever achieve is garnered from proper food, not overeating, some exercise, good sleep and all the rest of that stuff.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the Invictus Mindset Podcast. Today's guest is a former research biochemist. He's a two-time New York Times, Wall Street Journal best-selling author of The Paleo Solution and Wired to Eat. And something most don't know about this gentleman is that he co-founded the first and fourth CrossFit affiliate gyms in the world. He's also the co-founder of one of my favorite supplements, Drink Elementy Electrolytes, and a very well-versed man in the world of health, wellness, and nutrition. None other than Robb Wolf. Welcome to the show, man.
It's a huge honor to be here. I feel like I should be taller than 5'9" with an intro like that. So thank you.
That's awesome. I'm really happy that you said that because, you're 5'9", but you're a California State powerlifting champ, man, with a squat of 565, a bench of 345, and a deadlift of 565. I couldn't help but pull those stats. And that's impressive, man. Well played.
It wasn't bad, but it was a long time ago, very long time ago.
What was that journey like, though? I mean, obviously, you've spent some time in a weight room, and you might know a little bit about strength and conditioning.
Yeah. I had a near fatal youth football injury, actually. Was making a tackle and hit a rather stout young man in the thigh, actually, in the process of trying to take him down, and snapped my head back. It ended up with a bruised spine and a whiplash, but I actually had full body paralysis for a couple of days due to the inflammation around the spine. They weren't really too sure to what degree that would all recover. And then I didn't want to stop doing athletics, and I wanted to try to get back into football. And so grudgingly, my doctor said, well, if you start lifting weights and really, develop your neck and just get overall stronger, then maybe that's the way that you can get back into this. And the little neighborhood gym up the street, gosh, what was that thing called? It was in Redding, California. And I can't believe I can't remember it now.
Isn't it funny? The name,
yeah.
The name may be gone, but I'm sure you have the imagery. You remember the smell. The exact spot where you started to attack this journey of wanting to get stronger.
Yeah, and unbeknownst to me, there were a couple of guys in the gym that were world powerlifting champions. Danny Thurman and one of his mentors. And Danny is still competitive in I think mainly the bench press scene, but like he had at 165 pounds, I think close to a 500-pound bench, and
oh my gosh,
and some numbers like that, like really, really phenomenal. But they basically kind of took me under their wing, and I was doing kind of ridiculous encyclopedia of modern bodybuilding, Arnold Schwarzenegger stuff, and really just kind of flailing, super overtrained. This was before cars and motorcycles, so I was still riding a 10-seat bicycle everywhere, and so they're like, "Dude,
that was your zone 2 back then, man."
Yeah, it is zone 2, except when your girlfriend lives like 20 miles away, and so then you're riding all over hell and back. They're basically like, "You got to buy a motorcycle. You can't ride your bike anymore. Like, you got to do this. You got to do this." And so what was fascinating is the volume and intensity of my training, relative intensity, dropped dramatically because we got into this periodized strength training protocol where you get a max set, and then you do a power cycle where it would be like relatively higher volume, lower intensity lifts, and then it would peak at like 10 sets of one type stuff on squat, deadlift, and bench. And I did the core movements once a week. It was a very classic like egg cone esque type approach, but I got pretty darn strong. Those numbers, the 1475 total at 181 pounds was when I was 19. So had I stuck with it, I think I could have done something interesting. But this was right when bench shirts, squat suits, all this stuff was really taken off, and and there was a ton of drama around it. It's like, oh, it's okay, it's not that big a deal. And then I was kind of like, well, where does this stop? When I've got like an exoskeleton that lifts the weight for me. And so I just kind of lost interest in it, and that's what led me not long after that into Thai boxing and Brazilian jiu-jitsu and all that type of stuff.
That's really cool context, man. Isn't it crazy how we as humans, like if some is good, more is better.
Right.
We're always pushing boundaries, and in some ways that's really good. But then gently in other ways, it's like really defying human biology and just adding additional layers and complexities into the game. But I don't know, a part of me really loves that, and a part of me really hates that at the same time.
It is the best and worst of us all at once, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And that's what's so interesting about what you've done, Robb, especially with the conversations that you've brought to the table around nutrition, because modern nutrition it's really just not the best, man. It's really full of processed foods. The majority of the sodium that is consumed by people is from these processed foods in the form of preservatives. You got volatile sugar thrown into the mix that's highly addictive. And I don't know, I think I read something the other day around the foods that we're having are forcing us to then consume certain drugs. And then when you pause for a moment and you think, oh, FDA, Food and Drug Administration, now it kind of makes sense. They're working synergistically together. And then you funnel that towards like our healthcare system, which I had an amazing conversation with Chris Kresser around some of that. And he brought up a really good point, which was, imagine if our medical system focused on prescribing exercise and nutrition instead of immediately dishing out medications. People would solve the root cause of their issues and learn to live healthier and more fulfilling lives. But that takes effort. Trident Coffee is sponsoring this episode of the Invictus Mindset Podcast. My guys over at Trident taught me something really important this last year, that we are all a bundle of stories, both good and bad, and everything in between. At Trident, they're storytellers. All of their cold brews remind their customers that they are part of something bigger than themselves. They help create connections through symbology and storytelling that engage their customers on an emotional level, and this distinguishes them from other coffee brands. You can find Trident in Imperial Beach and in Coronado. They offer over 14 plus nitro cold brews along with dairy-free options. You can find the perfect brew and pair it with one of their treats from their keto bakery. All these options will allow you to support your health and fitness journey with Trident Coffee. They're more than just a coffee company. You can check them out over at tridentcoffee.com and use code Invictus20 for 20% off online and in tap rooms. Once again, that's tridentcoffee.com. Use code Invictus20 for 20% off online and in tap rooms. Take your coffee experience to the next level. Two important factors for us over at Invictus Mindset are true care and attention to detail. My friends over at RX Smart Gear have been bringing innovative fitness tools to the market since 2009. From their award-winning Evo speed ropes, to their amazing gymnastics grips, to their line of inflatable fitness equipment, they're constantly looking to problem solve within the fitness industry. They're always allowing us to have our gear work for us rather than against us. Hop on over to RX Smart Gear and use discount code Invictus Mindset to shop their latest cutting-edge gear. Have your gear work with you and not against you. It's not just this clean, here's a pill. And I wanted to start the conversation here today just because I feel like it's a really important game changer where I think you could share some incredible nuggets in this arena that can truly help people.
honored to help any way I can. I mean, to me, an interesting thing is I'm old enough now that I had a fair footprint within the 20th century, and hopefully I'll have a decent one in the 21st century also. But the 20th century was really defined as a prescriptive medical model. Like if you got hit by a bus, you had surgery, and hopefully you survived. Antibiotics, vaccines are arguably some of the most amazing medical advancements that we saw during the 20th century. But those things were all very passive. Like everything about it is passive. Here's this prescription, go take it, and you're good to go. And in the early 20th century, that was really an amazing benefit to the bulk of the world, because what they really needed was to not die of infectious disease and to have a better go at surviving accidents and trauma and whatnot. But folks' diets in the early 20th century were comparatively still pretty good. You know, there wasn't that much processed food. People were still pretty active and whatnot. Physical culture was still kind of an important thing. But then as our health deteriorated due to changes in diet and lifestyle, we still stuck with a prescriptive model of healthcare. Take this pill, do this thing, this thing will lower your blood sugar, this thing will lower your cholesterol. Oh, by the way, it has these 18 different side effects that might arguably be worse than the thing it's trying to treat. And when we look at 20 years down the road, it doesn't actually make your life longer or better. It just kind of sort of manages symptoms for the most part. And that's kind of where we are now, where, God, I forget what the numbers are, but like the average 50-year-old person is on something like 8 different medications at this point. And it's just kind of blossoming out from there. And so I think that there was at least initially some good intention around the prescriptive model of medicine, that we just want to help people. But man, folks have figured out that there's a whole lot of money to be made off that. And also the reality is that getting people to willingly do diet and lifestyle change is really challenging. Like it's one of the most difficult things that we can ask people to do. You don't really need better examples than looking at people smoking through a trach hole when they've already kind of wore the tread off of that from smoking or different addictive processes. So yeah, it's a tough thing, and it is not going to be an easily solved problem for sure.
Well, you had the bravery and courage to kind of die on that mountain early on. You got involved into the CrossFit space. You had some synergies with some of the tremendous OGs, John Wellborn being one of them. Shout out to him. He's a member of Team Too Tall. He's a big dude, powerlifting guy, and he's with Power Athlete now with Tex and those guys over there. Big fan of those guys. And you used to go around giving nutrition seminars, and you were giving advice early on. I mean, modern day, everybody's got a master class in some sort of course, or they're giving seminars or this and that, but you were doing it early on before it was really cool. And when you probably got a ton of pushback, and there probably wasn't like this huge gamification around it. How did you ultimately start leaning into this paleo style diet, and what led to you writing your book, The Paleo Solution?
Oh man. So I was a research biochemist originally in kind of the areas of cancer and autoimmunity research. I was doing just some very basic bench chemistry, looking at the fatty acid composition of red blood cells, and which is mind-numbingly boring on the one hand. Like it's just highly repetitious. You have to have a lot of attention to detail. But it was important in that if this work was done well, some of it was part of the Nurses' Health Study, which is one of these massive studies. And they basically would look at the composition of these folks' red blood cells, and then do correlation studies around cancer, autoimmune conditions and whatnot. Is the relative amount of omega-3s versus omega-6s, saturated fats that we find in the red blood cells, does it correlate with different disease states. So it was pretty cool research. But I was tinkering with my diet at that time. I had been a state powerlifting champion, eating kind of a standard bodybuilder diet, like high protein, low fat type of diet, but had some gut issues looking back. Like now that I think about it, there were some kind of gut issues early in my childhood. My mom had a lot of gut issues. She had celiac and some other interrelated autoimmune conditions. But I decided to tinker with veganism. And veganism may work for some folks, but it definitely was not a good fit for me. And I'm about 170 pounds right now. I'm 5'9". At the low ebb of my kind of vegan experiment, when I developed ulcerative colitis, I was about 125, 130 pounds. So I'm not a big dude. And if you imagine 50 pounds less of me, like I was in disastrous condition. Like
yeah, you definitely raised my eyebrows with that one.
Yeah, it was bad news. I have a couple of pictures from that time, and it's kind of shocking. So I was very sick. I knew I was sick. The doctors that I was working with suggested immunosuppressant drugs and surgery for my ulcerative colitis. Like they wanted to cut out big sections of my digestive tract. And I knew enough about medicine at that time that I was pretty well aware that was it was at best kicking the can down the road. Like it wasn't going to address all the underlying issues. Immunosuppressant drugs have all kinds of problems with them: increased cancer rates, more likelihood of dying from an infectious disease, and all this other stuff. And then just cutting out real estate, your part of your digestive tract. There's nothing really great about that. It can save your life if you're really in this, terrible acute flared phase. But again, I knew enough about all that it wasn't a bargain that I really wanted to make, but I also wasn't totally sure what else I would do. But I was chatting with my mom around this time, and she, like I said, had health problems for a long time, as long as I can really remember. And she mentioned that her rheumatologist ran some blood work on her, and he suggested that she was reactive to grains, legumes, and dairy. And then she was telling me this is 1998. She's telling me this. I'm like, grains, legumes, and dairy, man. So I was vegan at the time. So the no dairy thing kind of made sense to me, but no grains, no legumes. I was literally sitting there thinking, oh, what on earth do you eat if you don't eat grains and legumes, Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, okay, grains, legumes, and dairy. That's like agriculture. What did we eat before agriculture? And again, mind you, this is 1998, newish internet. There was this brand new search engine called Google that everybody thought might be kind of big, might be kind of cool. And I had this idea. I'm like, oh, the Paleolithic, that's the way that we lived before agriculture. Like we were hunter-gatherers. So I went into the house, turned on the computer, and it was this old, you wait for the computer to boot up, and then you turn on the dial-up thing, you wait for it to connect, and into this fancy new search engine called Google, I put Paleolithic diet. And there wasn't a ton of material, but what was available there was really interesting. It talked mainly about gut and autoimmune issues. There was also some stuff around like insulin resistance and kind of metabolic syndrome and whatnot. But the gut and autoimmune stuff, I was like, damn, this is like describing things to a T. It was basically talking about kind of mismatch between our hunter-gatherer genetics and kind of the Neolithic and modern diet. So I was sick enough that I had nothing to lose. I'm like, anybody in the kind of vegan scene would say that reintroducing meat or seafood or whatever was going to give me cancer and heart disease and all this stuff. And it's like, well, cancer and heart disease might kill me in 20 years, but this shit that I've got right now is going to kill me today. So I'll take the other option. And the funny thing is, at this time, there was nothing really like paleo diet written yet. Like this genre didn't even exist. The closest thing that I could find was an Atkins book. And what was interesting about the Atkins book, it was all oriented towards weight loss, which was a little bit intimidating because I certainly didn't need to lose weight at that time. But as I read through the book, because the couple of forums that talked about paleo diet type stuff, they were like an Atkins book is really pretty on point with this stuff. Just make sure you're 100% like grain-free and gluten-free and all that, in addition to the other recommendations. But what was fascinating is this, written in the 1970s Atkins book talked a ton about gut and autoimmune issues, reversing gout. It was interesting. It wasn't just a weight loss book. Like there was this kind of integration of restoring metabolic health and then, addressing these gut and autoimmune issues. So I went paleo, and the first meal was slow baked beef ribs and some not watermelon, cantaloupe, and a little bit of salad. And like I ate this meal, and at this time I had terrible sleep. Like for 2 years, I had super disordered sleep. I had trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep. I fell asleep in the chair that I ate the food. Like I've never done this in my life. Like it was like I was roofied. And so I ate ribs and cantaloupe and just a tiny little bit of salad. And I passed out in the chair, woke up like 12 hours later, like what the hell happened? But it was the best sleep that I'd had in like 3 years because of this deteriorating health. So like, okay, I think there might be something to this,
One thing I'd love to note real quick is, I feel like there's a book out there now. I'm sure you've checked it out. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. And
I haven't seen that one. Yeah.
It's kind of a cool one. And I mean, it very much relates to what you're talking about now, where there's going to be little whispers that come from the body, right? In the form of poor sleep, maybe skin issues, maybe joint, maybe brain fog, maybe ulcerative colitis in your case. And oftentimes we just attribute it to like, oh yeah, that's just the way it is.
Right.
And it's like, I think that's like a really bad concept that we should really highlight. And it's something like the body is communicating to us in very innovative ways. And they're trying to highlight things and put them on our radar. And sometimes we just choose to not see that. Oh, we'll just mask it with Advil. We'll just mask it with caffeine. And I really do think that this is such a simple way of like, listen, take a moment, take the headphones out, get off the screen, pay attention to how you actually feel. How are you thinking? How are you integrating yourself and orienting yourself in the world? This episode is brought to you by HVMN, Health via Modern Nutrition. They launched the world's first ketone drink in 2017, and then in 2022 launched the version 2 of their exogenous ketone product line called Ketone IQ. I found that incorporating ketones into my morning routine increased my daily focus and energy. The beauty of this product is that you can stack it. It doesn't even have to replace your morning routine. My morning routine looks like taking the dog on a walk, hitting my daily shot of Ketone IQ, hopping in the cold plunge, and then finishing it off with a nice Trident coffee while I soak up some morning sunlight. Try out some ketones for yourself by using the code INVICTUS for 20% off Ketone IQ. Ketones are a super efficient fuel for your brain that leaves you feeling energized and clear-headed. Give it a shot. I promise you won't regret it. Once again, use code INVICTUS for 20% off Ketone IQ. Move fast and break shit. This is one of the core values at LSKD and something that we fully resonate with here at the Invictus Mindset Podcast. LSKD develops functional sportswear with a streetwear aesthetic that's on a mission to inspire you to chase the vibe through sport, fitness, and adventure. Through my experiences with LSKD products and their team members, I have found a brand that I can call home that keeps me performing at my highest level through fitness and business. I train daily in the rep shorts and love the versatility they offer, so I can go from training at the gym directly to meetings, client consults, running errands, or preparing for podcasts. The LSKB vibe has finally reached San Diego, and we want you to experience it too. Go to us.lskd.co to start shopping today. We want to inspire you to chase the vibe. And I really appreciate the storytelling and the concepts that you're sharing, because that's hard to do in 1998, man.
Yeah. And I have a great. It sounds like a great book, and as much progress as I've made with this stuff, I have a I think a potentially interesting anecdote around all that stuff too, but I'll try to step this thing up. It's 25 years now that I've been fiddling with this stuff, so the story can drag on and on. But the long and short is that this dietary transformation changed my life. It certainly saved it, and it was right on the heels of that kind of transformation that one of my first kind of mentors in this paleo diet world, Dr. Michael Eads and his wife, Mary Dan Eads, they wrote a book, Protein Power Life Plan. And this to me is still one of the most, it has stood the test of time better than just about any book written. It talked about circadian biology, sunlight, vitamin D, magnesium, adequate protein, omega-3 fat, gut health. I mean, it was all in there. And this was in 2000 that this was released. And around this time, I had decided not to go to medical school. I just couldn't wrap my head around, like, how do I do another 4 years of basic medical school, 4 years of residency after that, to just get out then and mainly be prescribing drugs. And even at that time, what I was finding, I actually started doing medical billing for a couple of doctors, some naturopaths and some MDs, because I wanted to understand the back end of the business before I went into this stuff. And I was talking to these people and they're like, all I do is paperwork now. And this is even before all the EMR, like electronic medical record stuff. Doctors don't really doctor that much anymore. They mainly do record keeping, and it's just soul sucking work. But I decided that I really didn't want to do medicine. I didn't want to do a PhD in this stuff, but I wasn't entirely sure what I did want to do. And it was right around this time I was poking around, searching for material from one of the popular people in this very, very early paleo diet topic. This guy, Art Devaney, who's a retired professor of economics down at UC Irvine. And he had some amazing material that this weird website called CrossFit.com had a link to one day. And so it took me to CrossFit.com, and I was kind of poking around, looking at them, like, interesting nutrition information. These workouts look ridiculous. This high rep Olympic lifting and everything that just looks silly. But I told my friend Dave Warner and another friend, Nick Nibbler. Dave's a retired Navy SEAL. Nick is a retired Marine officer. I told him, I'm like, oh, check out this website. The workouts are goofy, but they have some great nutrition links to it. Well, we didn't see Nick for about a month, but then when we saw him again, like, his neck looked bigger and like he just looked different. And I'm like, what have you been doing, man? He's like, oh, I started doing that CrossFit thing. And Dave and I had basically converted his garage into a gym, literally one of the first garage gyms. And we started working out together, started following CrossFit, really enjoyed it. And what I realized was that gym space is primary care medicine. Like, and I've had that saying for a long time, the gym is, as primary care medicine. And I realized that was the type of medicine that I wanted to practice. And so we reached out to Greg and Lauren Glassman, the founders of CrossFit, and we're like, hey, here's our situation. We've been training people out of this gym. We want to open up kind of a commercial, entity. Can we call it CrossFit? And they were like, yeah, go be achieve. And that ended up being CrossFit North, which was the first CrossFit affiliate. And then I had a chance to move back down to Chico, California, and open what was then the fourth CrossFit affiliate, NorCal Strength and Conditioning, CrossFit NorCal. And I just got to work with tens of thousands of people, either directly or indirectly, initially being part of the CrossFit certification team, eventually kind of being out on my own, starting my own blog, eventually a podcast. But the first book that I wrote, The Paleo Solution, to the degree it was good, and looking back, it's a pretty solid book. It is because I didn't write the book in a vacuum. Like, it was when I started doing the nutrition seminars, I started writing a guide for people to read before they got to the seminar, so that they would have a first pass at a lot of the material, and there'd be references in it and recommended reading. And this thing just kept getting larger and larger. And eventually a good friend of mine, Glenn Cordoza, who was an author for Victory Belt Publishing, which they've done like Kelly Starrett's books and a bunch of other books. But my book was like the first one that really went big for them. But he was like, man, I think with the following you have, one, this looks like a good book. And two, given the following you have currently, I think that you could make the New York Times bestseller list. So I sat down, and my wife was kind enough to basically take over all aspects of running the gym for about 6 months so I could sit down and write that first book. But that's broadly like where all the stuff plugged in. You know, I went from addressing my own health issues, decided that I really didn't want to plug into the mainstream medical scene, recognized the huge potential that a gym run like a CrossFit facility could offer to people for changing their health, because you're talking about sleep and food. You've got awesome community. The exercise is phenomenal if properly dosed, and you know it's kind of hard to imagine a better scenario for helping people get optimized in their health.
Rob, that's such an incredible story. It's something truly that I think more people need to hear, that the gym is primary care medicine, because it's more than just the X's and O's of here's a workout, go execute it. It's exactly what you said. It's humble and innovative implementation of the 9 ancestral tenets, which are so commonly overlooked because they seem so easy, of eat, sleep, move, connect, shield, cold, bond, fight. Like there's so many different value adds to that. And you mentioned like primal or Paleolithic style living. And there was definitely a shift at the onset of agriculture, right? And I think it came on in a positive light because we needed to mass produce food. We needed to have it local and in certain demographics because it was hard to ship, or things were going to go bad, or mold, or different challenges that came with the movement of food. And so as a byproduct, you started to see the implementation of pesticides. You start to see all these different chemical adds, very similar to looking back to your powerlifting days, right? Like agriculture was a really cool thing, but then you needed to add all these extra things to mass produce. Powerlifting was a really cool thing, but then in order to lift the big weights, you started to add the gear.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean like the drug gear. I mean like,
Right.
you know, the different elbow things and the bench suits and the squat suits and the different forms of knee sleeves and elbow sleeves that enhance performance.
Right.
And I don't know, I just see a really cool cross correlation there where humans are awesome and they're also really fucking annoying.
Right. Right.
When you look at
the good enough is never good enough. And again, it's a double-edged sword for sure. Yeah.
LMNT, pronounced element, is a tasty electrolyte drink mix with everything you need and nothing you don't. That means a science-backed electrolyte ratio with none of the junk. No sugar, no coloring, no artificial ingredients, no gluten, no fillers, and most importantly, no BS. Whether it's after a long workout, hot yoga, or an intense sauna and ice session, I've been using Element to keep me hydrated and replenishing all of my lost electrolytes. So many of us wake up chronically fatigued, and the antidote to this is salt water. Salt has previously been blamed for blood pressure issues, but new research shows that replenishing salt and electrolytes can lead to more energy, no headaches, a clear mind, and enhanced focus. Use the link drinklmnt.com/invictusmindset to make any purchase of Element, and you will receive a free sample pack with all of the Element flavors. Once again, that's drinklmnt.com/invictusmindset. It just goes back to that famous saying, I think it was from Deepak Chopra, around we're not human doings, we're human beings. But inevitably,
Right.
we're always trying to do. And,
Right.
you know, sometimes that's, like you mentioned, a double-edged sword. Looking back
Right.
at the paleo solution.
Let me throw one other thing in there. Sorry to interrupt you, but
No,
I do think it's kind of important. So you mentioned, what was the title of that book again, about the body tells you?
The body keeps the score.
The body keeps the score. So I had put my ulcerative colitis largely into remission for 25 plus years. My mom had celiac, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, like all these different things. I knew I had a lot of autoimmune potential, but I felt like I had it pretty dealt with. But I've done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 12 years now. And for a couple of years, like my hands just ached. Like I just had achy hands. I don't have a really grip intensive game. Like I don't like wrap up sleeves and everything. Like I kind of play a no-gi game, whether the person's wearing a gi or not. But I just attributed this achiness in my hands to jujitsu. But my wife made me a keto cheesecake 2 years ago for my birthday. My birthday's in January, and I don't kick my heels up a ton, but she made me this keto cheesecake. It was absolutely amazing. I went headfirst into the whole thing, and I woke up the day after eating it, and this part of my hand just felt like it was on fire. Like it felt like an animal was eating it from the inside out. And I started poking around. I did a little blood work. I'm like, shit, I've got a rheumatoid arthritis flare. And it was like in this part of my hand and this knuckle, like you can kind of see some of my knuckles are pretty chungered up from it. So I kind of realized that dairy, bovine dairy I've tinkered with this and gone on. But when I pulled cow dairy out of my diet entirely, and also tomatoes, ironically, like tomatoes have been one of these things in the paleo diet world that people would talk about nightshades and they would be problematic. I kind of made fun of people about them. Like tomatoes aren't that big of a deal, like maybe some odd person here and there, but tomatoes and dairy will fuck me up at this point. Like it will get me into a full autoimmune flare. When this first happened really severely, I had to go on prednisone and some pretty hardcore painkillers. Like it was like an 8 or 9 out of 10, like absolutely mind blowing pain in my hand. Like I've had few experiences of pain and unremitting, just constant. So I've been able to stuff that little monster back into its cave more or less. I do get some little pop-ups here and there, but it was interesting that for several years, I clearly had some low-grade autoimmune issues cooking that maybe I had been able to largely address through the dietary changes that I had made, but I had never gone like 100% dairy free for really extended periods of time. I felt pretty good on using some dairy. What's interesting is I get no gut symptoms from it at all. I get no gut symptoms from the tomatoes and different nightshades, but I absolutely feel all that stuff on the systemic side with regards to the autoimmunity. And so that book, I definitely want to check that out because like that was something that if I had been paying a little more attention years earlier, I might have been able to zero in on it. But and the kind of funny thing with that is the way I was eating prior to removing the dairy and the nightshades, for 99% of people, they would think that it's lunatic, diligent, and strict because it's low carb, it's ketogenic, it's gluten-free. Very, very rarely would I do like some corn tortillas or something like that, or like some potatoes or something. Like I for a variety of reasons, that was just kind of the way that I needed to eat. So I was eating in a way that was already far more strict than what most people ate. And if I didn't want to develop worse disease symptoms, I need to eat more refined even than that.
Mm-hmm. With that being said, we've kind of danced around a couple fad diets. Now I know you tinkered with veganism for a little while, and then we were really leaning heavily into the paleo diet. Can you define the paleo diet for us? And then following that, can you define the keto diet? Because I feel like those are thrown around a lot, and I'm not sure there's terms around the specificity as to what they encompass.
Yeah. I mean, the paleo by exclusion is maybe the easiest way to define it. In theory, you don't eat any grains, any legumes, any dairy. By inclusion, meat, seafood, roots, shoots, tubers, nuts, seeds. Some people make the case that it's like if you kill it or dig it up with a stick, then that kind of works. And again, there's caveats to it, like tomato, potato, eggplants technically could fit within a paleo diet, but people with autoimmune disease maybe shouldn't eat those things. So the reason why I like things like a paleo diet, one, I think they work pretty well, but also when people have just been eating a standard American diet, like they don't know where to start. And so this is at least like if you're playing darts, like it's like getting you within 80% of the bullseye. It's a place to start, and then we can kind of kick it off from there. The ketogenic diet is interesting in that it is maybe the only diet that is defined via a physiological parameter, which is having blood ketone levels of beta hydroxybutyrate higher than 0.5 millimolar per liter. And this is as a consequence of carbohydrate restriction, forcing the body to burn fat as a primary fuel source. And as we burn fat without adequate other substrates to plug into the citric acid cycle, then we start making ketone bodies. And these ketone bodies can help fuel the brain, can help fuel the heart, can fuel the muscles and whatnot. Interestingly, both the brain and the heart seem to run more efficiently on ketones. There's some really fascinating health benefits from ketogenic diets and being in the state of ketosis. Fasting produces a state of ketosis. This is one of the kind of confounding things for vegans that hate ketogenic diets, because usually they involve like fat and some animal products, but they're really a big fan of fasting. Like when you're fasting, it's indistinguishable metabolically from being on a ketogenic diet. So just.
And you kind of define fasting a little bit for people in the sense of like, what should they look for? What's a common amount of time that maybe can quantify getting the benefits that you're mentioning that come from fasting?
Yeah, it's funny because I wrote my first article on intermittent fasting in 2005. It went out to mainly a CrossFit scene, like a CrossFit population. And by 2006, I so deeply regretted ever writing that article. I can't even describe it, because 50% of the folks who tinkered with the intermittent fasting, the only upside that they found was that it simplified their lives. Like this was when kind of the Barry Sears zone type approach was very popular, and Barry would recommend like 6 to 8 small meals a day, which for some people works, but it also can be very onerous, and that it just feels like all that you're doing is eating all day long. So for about half the people, they just said, I feel exactly the same, but it's just easier. I eat 2 or 3 meals a day, which breakfast, lunch, dinner, like, oh my God, that's a crazy, notion. For about half of the other people, they felt pretty good for about 2 weeks, because I think they were in a crushing amount of stress-induced trauma, which elevates your dopamine and cortisol until everything fails. And then you end up in this overreaching, overtraining scenario, and all of your performance goes retrograde, your sleep gets destroyed, your libido is crushed, your hair starts falling out. And so literally about half the population that tinkered with this thing, I feel like it was an absolutely horrifically terrible move for them. And it was within this like stud athlete CrossFit scene. And about half the people that tinkered with this were clearly saw terrible retrograde performance. So it was not remote. Like, my God, you think about a drug that has like a 50% like fatality rate attached to it, or 50% like really adverse event rate. Like that's like the worst drug that you could ever imagine. And I did a talk, and you might link to it. It's called Longevity, Are We Trying Too Hard? And what I do is I go through all of the supposed benefits of fasting and, like avoiding protein. People were all fired up a couple of years ago about suppressing mTOR, which is a gene that's involved in both inflammation, but also muscle building. And what we find is that in an overfed state, both animals and humans express elevated levels of mTOR. And elevated levels of mTOR seem to foster diabetes and inflammation and cancer and cardiovascular disease. So the comparison was, let's look at overfed, basically obese individuals, or let's look at individuals that are partially starved. Nobody bothered to just feed organisms, either humans or other organisms, a species appropriate diet at a caloric level appropriate for their activity.
They only looked at the extremes, the black and the white
extremes. Yeah. And so what was obvious is that when one is overfed, too many calories, too many carbs, too much protein elevates mTOR, and that's bad news for health and longevity, without a doubt. If you starve an individual, then you dramatically suppress mTOR. But the thing is that we don't want no mTOR because it's involved in our immune process. It's actually involved in early detection of cancer and a host of other things. But the long and short is that everything, in my opinion, it's not, when I say opinion, it's got a little bit more teeth to it than just opinion. Like I think that this talk that I gave, like I think it's 150 slides and it's 60 minutes long. And like, I am like probably one of the best talks I've ever done. Like it's
Okay.
super
Can you say it one more
dense
time so people can check it out?
Longevity, are we trying too hard? And you just go Robb Wolf, longevity, are we trying too hard? And you can find the talks an hour and 15 minutes. But I think that everything that looks beneficial about fasting is encompassed by exercise. And if we are simply, and when I say simply, there is quotations around that in the modern world, it is a non-trivial thing to not overeat. But if one simply does not overeat, eats more or less kind of a species appropriate diet, and you do some modicum of exercise, I believe that every bit of benefit of fasting that we could ever achieve is garnered from proper food, not overeating, some exercise, good sleep and all the rest of that stuff. And I don't think there's any huge upside to fasting beyond that, other than some really specific medical conditions. If you have been really sick, if one is battling a significant illness, some period of fasting can be really good as a reset. But what I was finding is that people would do 5 and 10-day fasts a month, and these people were gone. They were losing muscle mass like crazy, and usually losing muscle mass in like their 40s and 50s, right at the point of your life where you want to be fighting tooth and nail to maintain every scrap of muscle and performance that you can. And my kind of greasy used car salesman pitch in that talk is basically, let's do everything that we can that optimizes our life today, and that more than likely is going to optimize us for our life tomorrow. And there's limits to that. Like, I think if you want to be a super high level athlete of any kind, CrossFit gamer, the volume and intensity may start becoming antagonistic to ultimate health. But you could be recreationally active in those things, and that would be incredibly supportive of great aging and good longevity and whatnot.
Yeah, that's super true. The other thing I like about fasting is that it sets just like gentle time parameters where you're eating from this time to this time, which probably just helps control people's urges a little bit more, maybe creates a little bit of structure, which is kind of cool. So there's definitely some fun mindset parameters that I think come along with some of these fad diet caveats. And I really appreciate you sharing some of those things. You've written so many different articles, and I know there was a time when the internet got a little strange, where it was roughly maybe just before, just after the COVID-19 pandemic, where you're talking about vitamin D and sunlight and all these things that we know now are tremendously helpful at the very least. This episode is brought to you by Mush. My friends over at Mush created an incredibly cool product of ready-to-eat overnight oats. And for those of you that listen to the podcast often, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And Mush has done just that, as their products have no more than 7 clean ingredients that are dairy-free, gluten-free, with no added sugar. Mush started right here at Invictus, as they had a vision to create convenient, healthy, and clean nutrition. And this landed them on Shark Tank, where the famous Mark Cuban invested in them. Now they're found in retailers all over the country, including Costco, Sprouts, Target, and Whole Foods. Check out my friends over at www.eatmush.com. But at that time, there was this thing called shadow banning that was going on.
Right.
There was this thing around search engine optimization. I know we saw, some of the people that were a little bit more aggressive with some of their stances getting removed from certain platforms. And you saw some gentle shifts in your in your website and within some of the articles that you had written, which we know now are tremendously valuable and can really help people in their journeys. What has that been kind of like, and what's your psychological stance there in relation to the gamification associated with trying to put good content out there, but how it's gently holstered close to the chest of Google and some of the other platforms that are out there?
Yeah, I mean, our experience initially was not so gentle. So like we've, like you said, I've written a lot of articles. RobbWolf.com wasn't like as much traffic and as much link back and status as like ESPN, but it was up there. Like it was one of those like kind of tier 2, tier 3 websites. It was lots of traffic, lots of link backs, high quality link backs. And then in 2000, and we had a good revenue streams in it, between my book, we had the Keto Masterclass and a couple of other things that we sold between Facebook and Google. And I've always felt like if I over deliver to people, wow them with material and support, like part of my job every day was spending 3 hours a day answering questions into different like social media outlets and stuff like that. Like anybody had a question, if it came in the email, I just did as many questions as I could answer in that like 3-hour block every day. That was just part of my job. I had built this thing up and did it in a different way than what most people did in this scene, which is trying to firewall themselves away from people and really systematize things. I wanted to stay engaged and just felt like if I gave a lot, then I would make a good living. And it worked really well. And then in, I forget which month in 2018, but Google had this thing called the OWL update. And the OWL update basically deranked a bunch of health related websites. And there were there's the guy Sayer G, who had a very, very popular website. And I would say a lot of his material would be questionable, but that's my opinion. It's kind of an opinion piece. He had some great material and he had some material that I'm like, oh, that's patently false. And here's the 5 ways that I could delineate that that's false. But I got hoovered up in that thing. Examine the supplement outfit got hoovered up in that. And what was interesting about that is that I was super outspoken about the unfairness of the scenario, in that if I or any of these people have inaccurate, information, here's your opportunity to do a piece to prove the point that this is inaccurate. And now you will be, the whole thought of Google was this meritocracy. It's like the best material ends up kind of rising to the top. And I think by and large that is true. But when we look back a little bit at the corporate capture of pharmaceuticals and Google and kind of media writ large, the websites that got hoovered up in that Google OWL update were very much in this kind of low carb, anti-establishment genre. And overnight, we lost 97% of our site traffic, which means we lost 97% of our revenue. We went from having a highly successful keto masterclass course that we would sell on Facebook to literally we could not sell it except for break even. So we were being fiddled with on the back end in such a way that it's like, yeah, if you want to put $1 in and get $1 back, that's fine. But we're never going to let you make anything more than that. Whereas before that, we'd put in $1 and we'd make more than $1. And we had glowing reviews and people liked it and it seemed to help people. So like we really got impacted with that quite early. This was 2018. So when 2020 came in and the cancel culture and the curation of and there was the whole like misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. And I forget even what each one is, but malinformation, it's all the stuff that was put on the Department of Homeland Security's website talking about the stuff that we need to keep our eyes open for to protect the world against. Malinformation isn't inaccurate information. It's truthful information that is inconvenient for the government and its subsidiaries. So it's truthful information that the government would rather not have be out there. It's inconvenient right now that somebody's telling the truth, and then there's like mis and disinformation. But we were just very early in that scene, so I was definitely quite sensitive to the the potential around that happening, and I had long, I guess, because kind of a bit of a libertarian streak, I had just been really, and CrossFit was a complete upstart and not within like the general auspice of like American Council of Sports Medicine, NSCA, and all that stuff, and was a victim of fraudulent studies from the NSCA and ACSM, like Glassman before he ended up flaming out with some unfortunate behavior on Twitter. But they sued the NSCA, ACSM, and won for fraudulent science, basically claiming that CrossFit was dangerous, that it had caused all these injuries, that the paleo diet had caused all this retrograde metabolic parameters. And I forget exactly how they tracked all this information down, but they made a case that won in court that this was all fraudulent, and won a rather sizable settlement and a retraction and the whole deal. But fortunately or unfortunately, my whole career, I've always been fighting kind of the mainstream. And it's not like I just go to look at, what's in vogue and then do the exact opposite. It's kind of like the way the world has worked. It's like people are building bridges out of balsa wood. And I'm like, hey, why don't we use concrete and rebar? Like, that's way stronger shit. Why don't we do that?
So, you're not purposefully playing the role of contrarian. You're finding problems that originated in you. And then you're realizing that there are solutions, but they just go against the grain a little bit. And the grain right now seems to be where the problem all started.
Yeah.
Grains, legumes, and those types of conversations, I think, should be had. And if it's enhancing the quality of people's lives, decreasing inflammatory markers, mitigating disease, getting people off of pharmaceuticals, doing things that don't come with a whole onslaught of side effects, I think you're doing some really cool things. And as we wrap things up, Rob, I'd love to dive into salt for a moment and electrolytes, because I'm a big fan of Drink LMNT. And I think it's something that sometimes gets misconstrued in the minds of most people, thinking that too much sodium is going to lead to enhanced blood pressure. And, I'd love to dive into that and then share a little bit of context as to how you started Element.
Yeah. It's the hypertension thing is a really big deal. Like, cardiovascular disease is the number one killer of people in developed nations. And one of the primary drivers of the atherogenic process is hypertension. It's high blood pressure. And without a doubt, sodium plays a role in that process. The body retains excess sodium, causes us to retain excess water. That drives the blood pressure up. And when the blood pressure is too high, then when the heart beats, we get non-laminar flow through the vascular system, and that causes damage to the vascular endothelium. And over time, that leads to atherosclerotic plaquing and oxidative stress, high blood glucose, dyslipidemia. All those things can play into this also. But the thing is that, okay, so sodium is a player in hypertension. We've known that for a long time. But the thing about that is that and this is kind of classic Western medicine. Well, sodium is involved in hypertension. So if we reduce sodium, we will reduce hypertension. And what we find is that's not necessarily true. It'll bring hypertension down a little bit to put people on effectively zero sodium diets, but it doesn't really reduce it that much. Like, it comes down a little bit, but people are still hypertensive. And part of that is because we store sodium in our bones and our soft tissue. And so even if you put somebody on a super low sodium diet for a long time, they can keep relatively normal sodium levels because they're just mining it out of their bones and soft tissue. When you mine sodium out of your bones, you also pull calcium out of the bones, which is not great. And if you do a little poking around, you find that osteoporosis is really suspiciously linked to super low sodium intake, that it seems to be a driver of osteoporosis. So this is one of those funny things where, you know, diabetes is one of these things where it's like diabetes, either type 1 or type 2, is a condition of poor glucose management. So what does, and this is funny, I just kind of realized that just going through this. So diabetes is a condition of poor glucose management. What does the medical establishment recommend? Eat kind of whatever you want. Don't control carbohydrates by any means, and we'll just cover it with insulin, which has been an absolute failure and disaster. But yet, ironically, in the case of hypertension, they've recommended hypertension, a player or a piece of hypertension is sodium and is sodium retention. So if we reduce sodium intake, that should solve hypertension, but it doesn't. What solves hypertension is reversing insulin resistance, which when people become insulin resistant, we tend to see elevated insulin levels, which drives up aldosterone levels, and aldosterone causes us to retain sodium, regardless of how much sodium we're intaking dietarily. So this is where a low sodium diet has arguably maybe more potential downsides than upsides for most people. If you are hypertensive, if you are insulin resistant, a high sodium diet isn't helping you, but a super low sodium diet is also not helping you either. And what was interesting is maybe 4 years ago, there was a study that was pretty well done. It's a population level study, so not in a randomized control fashion, but the way that they went about doing it was pretty robust. And they just looked at the morbidity and mortality, the death and disease that occurred in insulin resistant heart patients relative to the amount of sodium that they consumed. And they looked at sodium excretion as a proxy for how much sodium that they consumed. So they basically collected urine samples, extrapolated what the sodium intake was, and kind of used that as a proxy for sodium intake, which is pretty accurate. And what they found is that there was a U-curve where at very low sodium intakes, there was exceptionally high morbidity, mortality. And then it went down when you were between 4 to 6 grams of sodium intake per day. The morbidity, mortality was at its low ebb. And then you had to get out to about 8 to 10 grams of sodium per day to be as at high risk for morbidity and mortality as 2 grams per day. And this was replicated a couple of different times from other studies looking at similar data, but in different populations. And it basically had that bracketed like 4 to 6 grams per day of sodium intake being the low ebb. And this is for a general population that's already recognized as being kind of sick, kind of unhealthy. You would think that if there was any benefit to low sodium intake, you would see it in this population. But what we found was the exact opposite. Exceptionally low sodium intake was way more dangerous than higher sodium intake. And it was more difficult to get too high of sodium intake than it was too low. And it was less dangerous. It was easier to manage and the whole thing. So that's been one of these interesting things that surrounds the sodium topic. Is without a doubt, hypertension is a major driver of cardiovascular disease. Without a doubt, sodium is a factor in hypertension. And also, almost certain, I'll put more caveats, but it also appears that really vigorous sodium restriction doesn't really address that issue. That's not the primary driver. And we're being told to consume less than 2 grams of sodium per day to 2,000 milligrams. That's kind of the standard wisdom from, on high from the medical establishment. But I believe the best data that we have available right now shows that for a general population, it is safest for sodium intake between 4 to 6 grams per day. And this will vary from person to person. And if you're an athlete, that could easily double. If you're on a lower carb diet, that could easily double. So like, low carb athletics, high motor output, you could easily see 8 to 12 grams of sodium a day being the optimum for other people.
Yeah, totally. I also think with minimally processed whole food diets, you're going to see less sodium because there's less
Yeah.
preservatives. I mean, if you
Yeah.
look at prepackaged foods, they're full of sodium. So inevitably, especially within the CrossFit space, people are at least attempting to eat that 80-20 rule and consume real food the majority of the time. And as a byproduct of combining that with exercise and consistent movement, you're probably going to need to supplement with a little bit of electrolytes. Not to mention, our world absolutely abuses caffeine. And in some cases, you need that sodium potassium pump. And it's almost like, as I've heard you say before, it's like a double espresso shot sometimes, and
Right.
a lot safer as opposed to just abusing a stimulant time and time again, and then getting that rapid rush and then that massive crash. And so
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing. Salt seems to also, help with sugar cravings. It's done some really cool things with regards to better exercise. And I just feel like it's a much safer approach, not to mention the flavor profiles that you guys have come out with are very well versed. They're not full of sugars and, can satisfy a large demographic of people. And so we're very fortunate to connect with you guys and partner with you guys on that front. And we've got our Invictus community drinking LMNT pretty often. And Rob, it was awesome to chop it up with you today and play ping pong. I really appreciate you doing this, man.
Huge honor. Anytime you want me back to bring down property values, I'll do it. So thank you.
Yeah, that'd be a blast. What you got going on right now? Like what's kind of in the mix? What can people perk their eyebrows for you? And then where can people find you?
Yeah, friend of mine stuff. If they're watching the video over my shoulders, the Sacred Cow book and movie poster. If you have questions around whether or not grazing animals are the primary driver of climate change and what the real impact is on climate change, different ecological features, the book and film really dig into that, and I think that is it's a hot and heavy topic. Like our food system is it is trying to be changed and at a rapid clip. And I don't think for the better. I don't think for the freer. I think it's actually allowing a huge amount of corporate capture to undermine our food sovereignty. So I think it's an important topic to kind of dig into. So I've been really pissing into the wind, trying to fight all things misinformation around the role of animals in like climate change and whatnot. In theory, I'm writing over on a Substack here and there. I haven't been doing much. Like we homeschool our kids, and then I have a fair work schedule beyond that. And I've just been getting that done. And where used to in the past, I would then do that next low gear and get in and grind out some writing. And I just haven't been doing that. I've got a list of probably like 200 or 300 articles that I want to do that I just haven't been getting to, but I will get back to that at some point. But it's robbwolf.substack.com. In theory, I'll have some more stuff there soon.
I really appreciate you sharing that you're actually a human. You've put out so much stuff. You're obviously not a robot playing the role of father, husband, business owner, innovator, and really pushing the edges. And I'm a big fan over here in alignment with what you got going on with Sacred Cow. We've got some good friends over at Perennial Pastures, and they're doing some cool things with regards to, what they do and how they raise their cattle. And they're actually combining organ meats into their grass-fed beef, which is super cool. And I don't know, man, I think what you're doing is really going to make tremendous changes in people's lives and get them back to living that paleo style ancestral living that's going to decrease disease, help people enhance performance, and honestly live pain-free, so we can really enjoy those moments of bonding as opposed to tinkering or having brain fog in our day-to-day life, which you and I both know is not fun.
It is not fun. Yeah.
Well, enjoy your day, man. For those of you listening on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple, if you enjoyed my conversation with Robb Wolf, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends. And as always, stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become. Till next time, guys. Are you over 35 and in need of a solid training program? Are you looking to improve your athleticism and keep up with the younger athletes in your CrossFit gym? Then look no further than our Invictus Masters program. This program places year-round emphasis on mobility and stability exercises with movements that we have seen directly benefit our Masters athletes. Our program is led by Nicole DeHart and offers a training program designed specifically for Masters athletes who are looking to compete at a higher level in the sport of CrossFit. Some of our top Masters athletes in the world train with us, including CrossFit Games champion Kevin Kester, Matt Beals, and Pat Sprague. You can learn more about their stories and the Invictus Masters program by checking out their episodes right here on the Invictus Mindset Podcast. If you'd like more information about the current training cycle or to join the Invictus Masters program, please email Nicole at invictusathlete.com. That's NICHOLE at invictusathlete.com.